Oh, hi everyone. My name is Jenny and I'm a rising junior at NYU Stern, where I am concentrating in finance and data science with a minor in social entrepreneurship. Sorry, that was a mouthful, but I guess some things about me outside of school. I'm really passionate about social impact and sustainability. I like to read, and recently this year I found out that I'm allergic to cats.
Hey everyone, my name is Jerry and I'm a rising junior at Princeton, where I'm currently studying operations research and financial engineering. Outside of school, I'm also the co-president of the Asian American Student Association at Princeton. And fun fact is, when I applied to Ignite Fair when I was in high school, I got rejected, I think twice. So that will forever haunt me.
Hi everyone, my name is Mia. I also go to Princeton. I'm entering my sophomore year. I am concentrating in international affairs and public policy with a potential certificate in finance. I'm still kind of figuring that out this year. But a not so fun fact is around 2 years ago, I attended events just like this. So it's interesting being in this position as a panelist. But yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Imtisal. I am studying bioengineering and also pursuing a minor in English. Outside of school, I am the director of a STEM education nonprofit. So that's kind of my passion project that takes up most of my extracurricular time outside of academics. Something fun that I just found out recently is that I'm working under a doctor for my summer research at a hospital right now. And I found out after working for him that he actually helped deliver me as a baby. I found his name on my bracelet that I got when I was born. I thought that was so cool. So yeah, that's one fun little fact that I just learned about myself.
Hello, I'm Eric. I'm currently studying physics and computer science at Berkeley, and I'm a rising sophomore this year. Something about me is I recently got back into playing piano again after taking a hiatus for like 5 years after I quit. So that's fun.
Hi, everyone. My name is Drew Shank. I'm a current student at the University of Chicago. I'm a rising sophomore. I would give a fun fact. It's not going to be as cool as Intishal's with the whole doctor thing, but I'm a big writer, so I've written a few books, best-selling books actually, which is pretty cool. And yeah, I love to write about science, so I can definitely get into that later. Yeah, nice to meet everyone.
Hi guys, my name is Angela Yang and I'm going to be an incoming freshman at UCLA this year. I'm really passionate about advocacy, especially for inclusivity in STEM. And a fun fact, yeah, nothing can top Imtisal's, but I got licked by a horse and that's how I found out I was allergic. But yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Maya. I'm a rising sophomore at UPenn at the Wharton School, and I'm planning to study finance and business analytics with a minor in computer science. My fun fact is that I used to be on Ignite Fair in high school as a sponsorship coordinator and then a co-chair when I was in grade 12. So yeah, super happy to be back.
I'm a rising junior at UPenn Wharton studying finance and statistics. I'm actually my mentor in one of the groups I've had. And I'm sorry. And yeah, this summer I was actually just in Cambodia working for a nonprofit.
Sorry for interrupting. Hi, everyone. My name is Elishba, and I'm going to my second year at the University of Edinburgh, where I study law. I absolutely love traveling. I just came back from Croatia a week ago, where I scaled a castle on top of a mountain at midnight, which was a lot of fun and actually really scary.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andy. I just finished grade 12 at Markville Secondary School, and I'm going to Oxford this October for philosophy, politics, and economics. And one fun fact is I'm currently learning to draw.
Hello, I'm Steph. I'm also going to Oxford / went to Oxford for a year already. My fun fact is, oh yeah, sorry, I study economics management. My fun fact is
This year, I went to Iceland and went glacier hiking and got to drink water straight from the glacier. I also ended up drinking a lot of rocks by accident, but it's fine.
Thank you so much to our panelists for those introductions, and let's get straight into our first topic of discussion, which is choosing a university and program. So for the first question, how did you choose your school and program of study, and what factors did you consider? Would you do anything differently?
So I can start us off with this one in case you guys forgot after the long introductions. I go to Stern, where I'm a rising junior. And to be quite honest, when I got my decision to go to NYU was not so much I chose that school. It was kind of like I applied for a bunch of schools and NYU chose me. So I guess I didn't have to choose between schools, but when choosing to apply for schools, the three things that mattered to me the most were program, location, and I would just say like overall feasibility. So I didn't apply for too many schools. I only applied for a couple, and of the ones I applied for, I was really interested in. And in terms of what stood out to me from NYU is, first of all, its location. So NYU is in New York City, which can be good and bad. If you like, exploring the city, obviously I don't think there's a better place to be than New York City, but it can be a little loud, and like occasionally at times my parents do worry about my safety because I do live alone. And the second thing that stood out to me about NYU was its program structure. So Stern specifically is a business school that offers like 12 concentrations. So there's a lot of aspects of business that you could delve deeper into. And there's also a lot of flexibility with that. So you don't actually have to declare your concentrations until the end of your third year. And I think people like admin at Stern is considering adding a third concentration. So right now at Stern, you can declare 2 concentrations. Maybe in the future, you'll be able to declare 3. So that's the kind of like space and time that I was given to work with within the program. And I would say those were the main deciding factors for me.
Yeah, so just to add on to what Jenny said already, for me, coming into university, I actually thought I was headed down more of a straight biology path. I wanted to pursue medicine eventually. I did a lot of bio stuff in school. I thought it was pretty straightforward. But once I got into university, I found out about some of the med tech opportunities in the greater Boston area through the hospitals affiliated with my school, as well as student organizations. So I tried to, attend some of their meetings, see what they were all about. And then I realized that I really liked learning about applications in STEM instead of just theory that we usually learn in class. So that's kind of where my interest developed. And I think a big factor to consider when choosing a major is obviously interest, but also time and what else you plan on doing in college. So, how much you want to dedicate yourself to studying, if you want to build more of a social life, get involved in student groups, how good your time management is, how many resources you have access to that can help you out, that sort of thing. And as I am going into my 4th year, I can say that I'm personally pretty happy with my choice. I wouldn't change it.
Just to add a different sort of perspective. So I'm going to the University of Edinburgh and I study law. And actually a key reason why I chose that is that a law degree in the UK is much faster than doing it in the States or as in Canada, where you have to do 4 years of undergrad, take the LSAT, and then do 3 years of law school. So once you go to the UK, you only have to do 3 or 4 years, and then you can come back for an equivalency degree. So that's the main predicator as to why I chose the UK. I chose Scotland in particular, which is where Edinburgh is located, because it's both a common and a civil law system. It just equips you to practice law in a multitude of jurisdictions. Means that you can come back to Canada, the States, wherever you're from, and do a common law equivalency, or go and live in the rest of Europe and do a civil law equivalency. As well, Edinburgh in particular has a lot of international connections. So a lot of students end up working in the international public sector, which is why I wanted to go into. It's also a fabulous city, and it's easy to travel throughout Europe. So I'm happy with my choice so far.
And then I can jump in and round off this question. So as a reminder, I go to Wharton and I applied to Penn as a school early decision, and I got my early decision. So I was kind of like locked in to go to Penn. And so no regrets there. I literally can't imagine myself going to any other school. Overall, just my decision process leading up to that was like, I was one of those kids in high school who did DECA and really liked it. So then I was like, all right, I want to study business in post-secondary. And I think when you're looking at US schools, a lot of them don't really have like business undergrad programs, except for say like Wharton or like NYU Stern, like USC Marshall and like stuff like that. A lot of schools tend to be more like, oh, you'll study like economics and then, can kind of go into a corporate career after that. And so that was definitely a consideration. And then I think it just in general, Wharton just has like so many like opportunities and like expertise that are like concentrated at the school, just in terms of the way they run their curriculum, all that kind of stuff. So the more info sessions I went to and like that type of thing, I was like, wow, I really like feel like I could see myself here. And I think like Penn culture as a school, and I'm sure this is similar across many other schools, but something that really attracted to me is like this whole focus they have on like interdisciplinary learning. So you'll find people doing like a whole mixture of like different things, like from like fine arts to like finance, all that kind of stuff, like all in one degree. And I'm sure Tom can speak to that as well. And so that was something that really attracted me to the school. And yeah, I'm really happy with my choice.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you so much for all of your insightful answers. Now I'll be moving on to the next question that's part of this category of choosing university or program. And that is, can you briefly describe your move from Canada to the US or UK for university? And what are some school culture changes that you noticed? What was the adjustment like?
I guess I can get started. I think there are two things that really stood out to me for past 2 years that I've been in New Jersey. I think one is the country difference, and two is the school difference. So first of all, I think having lived in America for 2 years, I think America in general has a very similar culture to Canada, but at the same time very different. I think a lot of the issues that we don't talk a lot here in Canada is very prominent and significant in the US. I felt like I was a very sheltered kid growing up, and I think moving to the US definitely exposed me to a lot of the societal problems that I wasn't 100% aware about when I was kind of growing up in a very safe and peaceful neighborhood, Richmond Hill. Second of all, I think the school culture is also very different than one, what I expected, and two, the school environments I've been in since growing up. I think Mia can also attest to this. I think Princeton, also similar to a lot of, I guess, prestigious university in the US and across the world, is known to be very elitist. So I've seen a lot of people with really crazy background that I wouldn't even like think of before just going to Princeton. For example, there's this girl in my class, and we found out halfway through the semester that she's like the straight descendant from one of the founding fathers of the United States of America, which is kind of insane. And there's really a lot of smart people around us, people who I think they accomplished things that I could never accomplish in my life. And I think one that's pretty daunting like kind of position to be in when you first go to school. But I think that also helped me a lot because I know whenever I'm at the school, there's always people around me that I can learn from, and there's something that impressed me every day. But I think at the end of the day, I realized like these are just like normal people too. They play sports in their free time. They like have sad days when they lay in bed alone, and they're friends, they're emotions, they're just regular people, and they're just like the same as you and me. So but it's definitely been a really eye-opening experience so far. I think a lot of the stories and lessons I've learned I wouldn't have, I guess, being exposed to anywhere else. So it's been a pretty interesting journey for me so far.
I guess I'll follow up on that. So I went to the UK. I think it was really interesting because this is back when Canada still was under like a lot of the COVID lockdown. And then I went to the UK where they were like, okay, COVID doesn't exist here, basically, do whatever. So that was really interesting because I kind of got, I want to say like a full like university experience because of it, as in there were like no restrictions as to what we were really doing, and there wasn't much behavioral change, as in all my classes were in person, all my tutorials were in person, everything like that. So just kind of like give a disclaimer, and that Oxford uses this thing called the collegiate system, and that its educational like system is quite different from quite a lot of other UK universities. So what I describe isn't necessarily going to be accurate for like, let's say like the University of Warwick or like LSE, for example. So kind of like the school culture changes. I think the main differences from Ontario universities would be that we obviously do have like large lectures with like, let's say 200 people, but a significant part of my like weekly routine would be preparing for these like 2 or 3 person tutorials where it's literally just like 2 of you and then a professor or like a fellow. We just call them like tutors generally. So that can like sometimes be really intense because it's only like the 2 of you there and it's for an hour. And oftentimes like you have to write like, let's say an essay a week and you have to present it. And then you sit there and you maybe get like a little bit roasted as like they walk through your essay and other things like that. And then besides that, in terms of like school culture changes, depending on I guess depending on like which college you go to, some of them have a lot more funding than the other ones. So that really impacts kind of like your day-to-day life. Because let's say like you go to one college and they have like a lot of money. So they're able to offer you like, for example, like you can get like your own room, you can get like your own like ensuite and other things like that. And maybe like they'll like fund a lot of free food and other things. In terms of I guess kind of larger like overall culture, I want to say it's not that different. There are like a couple of things that will kind of like spook you once you go over. Like I remember I was in a grocery store and then someone was like, oh, like how like oh, it was like, you're all right, which you like here normally you would only say that if someone looks like they're like going through something, right? So I immediately had that moment of like, am I like falling apart on the outside, like what's happening? But apparently that's used as a greeting. So there are like a couple small things like that that I think are pretty interesting. uh let's see, what was the adjustment like? It was kind of rocky for like the first couple weeks because you go there and like I think this is more so the case with the UK where it's like, oh, like you can immediately tell where people are from based on their accent. So I think that was pretty interesting. But besides that, like it's really nice, like, you know, looking at something and not having to mentally calculate, okay, I'm gonna multiply this times 1.13 to get the actual price I'm gonna pay for like tax included things. So yeah, I'll just wrap that up there.
Yeah, I can jump in a bit with my experience moving to New York. So I would say the adjustment experience to NYU is basically your adjustment experience to the city because the school and the city are very much intertwined. I know that's how NYU sells itself. So being like, oh yeah, I go to NYU, I live in New York City is kind of cringy, but it's also very much a real consideration. I would say the first thing that really stood out to me was the fact that NYU didn't have a campus. And like I went in knowing that, but because NYU doesn't have a campus, you're not really just ever hanging around with your friends on campus. You don't just like go and study at the library together because also NYU's library is kind of disgusting. People commute to school and people commute home. So in that sense, it's a very non-traditional college experience and it's very different from what I imagine like watching movies growing up. It suits some people, it suits some people less. I think I don't know a single person who has not said that they hated NYU during at least their first semester to year and a half, but I got used to that second semester and now that's something like I kind of enjoy. The second thing is that I think culture at NYU is not homogenous. I think it's very, very different depending on the program you're in. So Stern, for example, if you guys like are, maybe you guys don't know about this, but it's like people tend to have a bad impression of us because, you know, we're like finance bros, corporate slaves, we have no souls. I would say, you know, like that's never generalize, that's an exaggeration, but sometimes that can be true. Sometimes there can be pressure and tunnel vision is definitely something that you kind of have to catch yourself not falling into. And I would say with being in a business program, especially, it's not like you're there to like learn about, you know, finance, you're there to learn about data science. Like when all is said and done, like you're there to get a job. So even though you're in school, you're also looking for jobs, you're networking. So I think there's 3 elements you have to balance. So it's not just studying and life, it's studying, life, and getting a job, which is like, I don't like being the person that's like, you need to get a job, but that's very much a a major part of the business school education experience at NYU. The last thing I would say, since I live by myself in New York, honestly, being an international student is just hard because let's say you get sick, who takes you to the hospital? You don't have a family doctor anymore. You have to figure out all of those things on your own. So a lot of experiences can be kind of jarring. Like, for example, I got a really bad stomach bug and I had to go to the hospital. And I got a bill in my email for $700. And then you're like, well, the $4,000 I paid for health insurance clearly didn't do anything. And then you have to call like one person and another person. And it's just a lot of adult things you have to do at once. So I would say that's something to keep in mind where it's like there's going to be a jump, and I guess just be prepared for it. It's nothing you can't overcome, and there's a lot of learning experiences, but it can be a lot to handle at once. So having a support system is very important.
I just wanted to echo Stephanie and Jenny's sort of comments because my experience is just a culmination of both. It's a lot like Jenny's, whereas the University of Edinburgh is very integrated into the city. So there's not necessarily like a central campus, but you have these institutions that just spread across Edinburgh as a whole. And it's also like Stephanie's experience where you have tutorials. Luckily, our tutorials aren't 2 or 3 people. I think they're around 10. So it really helps because, sometimes you just don't have time to get that tutorial work done. I think the culture shifts I've noticed were actually pretty massive. Firstly, as Jenny indicated, you probably don't have like someone to drive you to the hospital, and there's a lot of things that you have to figure out on your own. I got really sick my first semester, like I was sick for 3 months. And you just have to figure out how to get better yourself. I think some of the pros of Scotland in regards to culture is that prescription medicine is free, bus travel is free, there's interconnected rail systems and cheap travel that could help you, go like across Europe. So I think that's a really great way you remain integrated. But I think the most important shift is that the background of people that you have is significantly different from North America, because I think coming from high school, everyone was sort of homogenous insofar as they're all like people who are around your age, working really hard, have almost had the similar type of perspective. But I think here you have a lot of people who have taken gap years. You have a lot of people who've like traveled or just had a myriad of experiences. So I've had some friends in my year who are 16, but I've also had some friends who are 24. So you have just quite a different community of people. That also just means that there's a greater variability of perspectives and experiences. So I guess your perspective, or that's a word I'm using very often, is broadened. The lifestyle is a lot more independent, so you're expected to grocery shop and cook on your own. So a lot of my conversations with my flatmates are about like the price of avocados, but it's a very again, independent type of lifestyle that I've come to appreciate. It can get lonely at some times, but as long as you join clubs, societies, it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly hop in and say that like the independence, the moving away from home, moving to a different country is intimidating, but also it gets very, very fun. Meet a lot of new people. You make a lot of really new friends who live all around the US, around the world, who have these different perspectives, who are there to meet, to like just have a good time too. So as much as like Princeton is very work hard, play hard, I think everyone who goes there can attest to that, in the sense that everyone is there. It's very collaborative. People are there to work together, but also people are there to go watch movies, to go to dance shows, to go see like the movies in the theater. So really, as much as it's like academically difficult at times, as there's going to be a culture shock in terms of moving to a different country and having to handle all these things on your own, you're going to meet people and you're going to build that support system and you're going to have a really good time. Like some random things I was able to do because I met so many people from around the world is just like, I have friends who live in London, so I was like going to go travel and see them. Or I have friends who were studying abroad who are like, hey, couch crash with me in Barcelona. Or I have friends who lived in California who are like, here, come over, visit me, like my roommate. All these random crazy experiences that I wouldn't have without this like international network. So I'm going to say it's a good time. And I don't want you guys to be intimidated by the whole culture shock thing, because I think it's something that you have a community of international students who are also going through it with you.
Thank you so much for all those wonderful answers. And yeah, cultural changes are definitely something really important to consider in this process. But now it's time to move on. So our next part of the panel is talking a little bit about the application process. All right, so my first question is, throughout your application process, did you consult any additional resources such as tutors, SAT or ACT prep guides, advisors, or anything else? And would you suggest working with them?
I think I'm starting off this question. So yeah, I'm moving in basically less than 2 weeks. So I remember this process very, very vividly because it just happened. I did apply ED, so early decision. So I handed in my applications around October. Going into the application process for NYU, it was very different for me for 2 reasons. Number one, of course, I was applying as I'm a US citizen, but I'm from Toronto, Canada. So everyone around me wasn't really applying to US schools. It was not nearly as common. And so the process for applying to a US school is very different. You go through a different portal, you have to kind of find some different resources. And two, I'm in an arts program. So if you are interested in arts programs, you will very easily find that there are not nearly enough resources for art students as there should be. They are very much focused towards STEM careers. That's just because that's a little bit more of what's common, which is not a problem. But if you are going to an arts program, you're going to find it's a lot harder to understand what you have to do. So a couple things that I found that really helped me were, number one, just kind of immersing yourself in extracurriculars. I know that doesn't really specifically apply to the application process, but especially, for example, if you are coming from an arts background, you're going to find a lot of people that sort of know the process of what you need to do if you're doing an audition or doing a portfolio, and going to like academies or talking to people that are working might be able to help you get started on that. In terms of actual application resources, I did have to do my SATs. Funnily enough, I actually tried to do them 3 times and every single time got canceled because of COVID. So I did study for them completely. I used a lot of prep books. There are some academies or like YouTube channels online that you can buy courses from, but I found that self-studying was okay. I didn't really want to spend the money. One resource I found was like incredibly influential in my application process was this organization called Peer One Marketplace. I think you can find them if you search them up on Google or on Instagram. They model themselves like a startup, but they basically provide affordable college advising. So when I looked online to try and see, hey, can I find someone to help me on my applications? They were going to charge like tuition rates just to basically try and look over my activity section. So Peer One provides you with tailored mentorship, so they can provide people from the school that you want. I even found someone from NYU drama, which I thought was insane. And you can go over your Common App with them. You can go over your activity section with them. They can just sit there and help you maybe boost or motivate you to do something that you couldn't do otherwise, even if you don't completely use what they're giving you. It's just a little extra support, especially if you feel like you don't know what you're doing in terms of like the US application process. If you come from a Canadian background, that can be really, really helpful. So Peer One, if you are looking for that, I would highly recommend them. And yeah, I think I'll pass it off to someone else, but that's kind of the basis of what I wanted to share.
I think I'll just kind of bounce off what Amber was saying. I definitely agree with everything she said regarding like having an advisor, because I think for a lot of high school students, you're kind of going through this process of figuring out what you want to study at university, like your own like story that you want to present. And all of this can be pretty scary at first. So it doesn't necessarily have to be advisors, but just talking to people who have experience and like who you trust can really, really help like how you build that application a lot. And in terms of tutoring and like SAT and like just for standardized testing specifically, at least from my experience, and again, this is just my opinion, I've done tutoring as well as like those classes before, and I personally haven't found them to be like really helpful. I remember I was in this like one class for 2 weeks, and at the end, I was literally getting worse scores than I started with. So at least for me, it wasn't helpful, but I can definitely see for certain people that it was. But at the end of the day, my take on kind of these like SATs and just any standardized testing, it's supposed to be a measure of how well you're able to kind of prepare for like this test or goal, like since you have like this given set of criteria. And honestly, like if you work and just kind of grind practice tests, you will be prepared enough to do them. You don't really need that any extra help. And same thing with most of my classmates, like literally all my classmates who've done better than I did, like I don't think any of them used tutoring before either. So I think the takeaway for this is, yeah, it can be helpful, but it's not necessary by any means. And you are absolutely able to do it by yourself.
Thank you for that advice. All right, so moving on, our next question is, which extracurricular activities or other non-academic achievements of yours do you believe stood out to admissions officers and played the biggest role in your admission?
Yeah, I can probably start. Is everyone frozen?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay. I thought everyone was frozen. So before I do start, I just want to say I looked at a lot of other people's extracurriculars when I was in high school, and one thing you don't want to do is replicate them. Like that's like the worst thing you can probably do, because university are they're trying to build like this great class of diversity. So people from all different backgrounds, and then replicating something doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get into that school. So yeah, don't do that. The biggest extracurriculars for me were, so the biggest one I think was when I was in high school, I had a friend who committed suicide, unfortunately. And from that, I created this app called Bioscope Wellness. It's a mental health app, and it connected crisis lines to physicians, and then also people with mental health concerns. And then this like blew up, and I fundraised $20,000. I spoke about her story, my friend, on global news, radio stations across Canada, and it was like this great light that came out of this really, really horrible thing. So I got to show adversity through that, and advocacy, all that stuff. And then that led to research, which is another big extracurricular for me. I did research a lot in high school. I presented this research. It's on brain cancer called glioblastoma. I presented it at Harvard, Stanford, MIT, and a few different places, which was super helpful. That led me to my third extracurricular, which was writing books. So I was a big research geek, and then that led me to write my first book on computational neuroscience. And I was applying to computational neuroscience, so that helped quite a bit. And then I was able to market this pretty well and work with professors who published books before, and it became a #1 bestseller for like 6 months. It's doing a bit bad right now. I think it's number 33 in the robotics section. But yeah, I think those are big things. Again, don't try to replicate it. Just whatever you're passionate about, pursue it to the fullest degree. You don't want to say you're passionate about healthcare. Please don't just join a club and then that satisfies healthcare. You want to focus on doing something else because it might look better. You want to pursue that passion for healthcare to the fullest degree and do X, Y, Z, whatever you think is really going to make you happy. Don't try to impress these colleges. I mean, maybe do that a little, but for the most part, you should be doing what you love, and then great things will come out of that.
I can jump in here as well. To add on, it's very, very important what Vishenk said, that you really cannot try and replicate anything. You are your own unique application. The more that you can make your own application stand out from everyone else, which is an incredibly hard task as it is, the better, because they want to see people that actually have seeds of motivation to do something, to change whatever they see around them, to change their communities, to change the world, even in the fields that they're working towards. And that does not mean that you have to go start your own nonprofit just because you think that that's going to kind of get someone's attention. Join a club that you love the mission of and help them towards something that they're doing. For me, it was a little different because, again, coming from that arts background, I didn't see a lot of clubs or organizations doing things that I wanted them to. One of the things that I found in my time was that I had no idea how to get started as an actor, especially a youth actor, because you tend to not really get a lot of opportunities when you're starting out. And so a friend of mine who's also in the arts, she's a film major, we started our own organization called Off the Charts. And essentially our mission is to kind of break down the stigmatization of the creative industries, of saying you can make a good career out of this as long as we kind of propel the success of people by giving them the resources they need. So we started off as a podcast, and then last year we actually did an Arts Universities conference where we worked with the Canadian Academy of Cinema and Television, Nifty, which is one of the biggest youth film festivals in North America, a bunch of different organizations that all had similar missions. So we said, come join us. And we basically helped to give applicants or students looking to pursue the arts real life advice from admissions representatives, from alumni. It was kind of just like a one-stop shop for everything you need for arts admissions information. And this is off the charts is something that I want to continue for as long as I can. There's just so much potential in it that I really see that I want to help other people with. So that I think was one of the standouts of my own application. But again, if you see something lacking in the community that you really think you can fill, I would say definitely try doing something on your own. But if you already see an organization or a club working towards something you're passionate about, it might be better just to help them, maybe expand their goals or reach newer heights with the information or the experience and knowledge that you can provide. So that's all to say, make sure that college admissions officers can see when you're just trying to do something to make them happy. Do something that is actually going to make you happy, and they're going to love that even more.
Yeah, to add on to that, exactly. I was very passionate, or am very passionate about reproductive justice and menstrual justice. So I think when COVID started, like really at the beginning of COVID, March 2020, if that was my grade 11 year, I came across this nonprofit organization working to fight period poverty and stigma in Canada. And it was just founded. It was like, if it was founded in March, I just discovered it maybe 2 weeks after it was founded. I was like, oh, this is really cool. I want to join. But I was really scared too. Like I was really intimidated. I was like, oh, I don't know anyone here. But I was like, what's the worst thing that can happen? And I ended up really liking it and working my way up to vice president by the end of my time there, as well as co-founding Canada's first National Period Day. So I did a lot of heavy advocacy work through this nonprofit organization that was already existed. I just came across on Instagram. And so like the whole message of that story is, as Amber said, you don't need to found your own organization. Really just finding things that excite you, finding things that are already existing, and then joining them and trying to take leadership is really, really exciting. So honestly, my menstrual justice and my advocacy work really was I think at the forefront of my application, and it was an organization that already existed, and I just on a whim decided to join. So I think one of my biggest pieces of advice is just trying to say yes more, and also knowing that if you join something and you don't like it, you don't have to stick in it just to stick in it. Just really try new things, explore.
Yeah, and I just wanted to jump in and maybe shed a different side of extracurriculars. I also did a lot of advocacy, but for me, I am a figure skater, and I did a particular niche of it, which is synchronized figure skating. And I did that for 10 years, and I pursued it all the way to the end. And I competed at Worlds and that kind of thing, and internationally and whatnot. And I know a lot of advice from different websites, whatever, say that you shouldn't talk about sports in your Common App or that kind of thing. But I did. And through it, I talked about taking leadership, but also these experiences that other people don't really see with mental health, drugs, that kind of thing, anorexia. And so whatever you do, maybe there's some small niche, whether it's a sport or anything else, try to draw on your unique experience and talk about some things that other people wouldn't be able to see if they aren't in this space.
Yeah, and kind of adding on to what everyone has said so far, one thing that I do want to mention is I think that it's really important to have an area of focus or some sort of theme in your application, because not only does it help you package yourself better, but it also helps you determine which opportunities you do want to pursue in high school and which things you don't want to say yes to. So personally, for me, a lot of my work was centered around financial and economic education advocacy. So back in 10th grade, I wrote a book on this topic because I noticed that a lot of the financial literacy resources online were really catered towards adults and people of an older demographic, but there was also a lot of support for it in the youth community. And so I decided to write this book, and after that, I started my own organization, Empower Ecom, which teaches students about economics and financial literacy. And all of these activities kind of tied together with my interest in finance and economics, which I demonstrated throughout my application. And so I think that having an idea of the extracurriculars that I was interested in helped me determine which activities I did want to pursue. So for instance, when I was thinking of which clubs I wanted to take part in my school, I didn't join a lot of different things. I actually only joined one club, which was my school's finance club, and I was able to become the president of that. And so because I determined what my area of focus is going to be, I was able to determine like more success in that field as well, because I think that when you become like well known for a few different areas, you're able to reach higher levels of recognition, and you're able to develop a lot more extracurriculars in that area over time. And I think another side of that is either creating your own opportunities or finding your own opportunities. For me, like the 10 activities that I listed on the Common Application, only one of them was through my school, and the other ones were either organizations that I worked with or projects that I created. So like going out there and not just limiting yourself to what's in front of you is really important for these universities, because it shows that beyond what's already available to you, you're willing to take the extra step and take initiative to see what you're actually passionate about and how you can contribute at the highest level. So I think number one, determining one or two or maybe a few areas of focus, and number two, creating your own opportunities or going out there and finding more things that you can get involved with.
Thank you to everyone for sharing your experience and your advice. So our next question is, were there any additional tests or supplementary materials that you completed when applying to the UK? So this is a question specifically for our UK students.
I can start this off. So when I applied to Oxford, first of all, for the UK, they have a completely different application system, which is called UCAS. So the equivalent would be like the Common App for the US, or like OUAC for Ontario. So you'd have to like fill in all your personal details there, and then fill in the extra things that you have to do specifically for the UCAS. So that would be one teacher reference, but it could be like the same teacher, as well as one personal statement, which is similar to the Common App personal essay, but a bit different in structure and content. And then lastly, the UK is pretty big on standardized tests. So when I applied for philosophy, politics, and economics, I had to take an additional standardized test just for that specific course at Oxford. And I signed up when I applied to Oxford, and then I took it in downtown Toronto. So it's pretty straightforward, and the test mostly focused on critical thinking and problem solving, but for different courses, the test could be different. So I know, like, for example, if you're applying to physics, you might need to take a physics test, and that would mostly consist of physics content. So it definitely changes a lot depending on what you're applying for, but there are definitely additional hoops you have to jump through if you are planning to apply to the UK. So definitely plan early and make sure you leave enough time and energy to prepare and complete all of the steps.
Yeah, Andy covered like basically all of it, but I just have like two main things to add on to. So number one, if you're applying to the UK, you should be applying right now, as in the application season starts in August. And I think it mostly has finished by the end of, I want to say by the end of October or like November, but I could be wrong. Because I don't know like what it is for other universities, but oh wait, no, sorry, yeah. So basically they all start giving answers around like November, like January, February, I think like March usually, in terms of your decision as to whether or not you were accepted or rejected. But like don't quote me on this, but I think some of them are also like rolling applications. So specifically the test that like Antia and I did for Oxford is called the Thinking Skills Assessment, and this applies to like a lot of kind of, I guess, the social sciences. In some cases, like if you are applying for like English at Oxford, then you have to submit an essay. So sometimes they'll ask you to actually submit like written work or previous work that you've done for things like that. And then also the last thing that I want to cover was tariff points. So you can look this up on UCAS, because I don't want to go through and explain it, because A, I'm not an expert, and B, it's kind of complicated. It isn't even like reading through the guide. You probably want to like put out like an hour or two just to like go through and read what tariff points actually are and how they kind of consider you against other like UK applicants, and how they consider you against other people who might be applying from regions similar to you.
Yeah,
there's just a couple more.
Oh, sorry, you go first.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just want to say that as Stephanie mentioned, the deadline, I believe, for Oxford and Cambridge was October 15th when I applied. So that's about 2 months from now. So if you are thinking of applying to the UK, definitely start your applications now. And I also just wanted to reiterate that these like additional tests are mandatory and like additional on top of what you've already completed when you're applying to the UK. So for me, like I took the TSA, but I also submitted my AP test scores and my ACT scores. So those all form like a part of your application.
Yeah, just to add on to that a little bit. Firstly, in terms of deadlines, Oxford's deadlines are October 15th, but a lot of the other universities actually have rolling deadlines. And I think the hard deadline is somewhere in January. But as was aforementioned, it's a good time to get started now because a lot of these universities, particularly the non-Oxford schools like LSE, KCL, Imperial, UCL, Edinburgh, and other universities you look at, do consider applicants on a rolling basis. So it's actually quite nice to get in like your acceptances quite early on in the year. One, because you can flex in front of friends, but second, it just takes away a lot of stress. And so just the sooner you get it into universities that have a rolling deadline, the better. And the second thing I was going to say on tests, so there are a lot of universities that require tests, but there are some schools that actually don't require tests. And so I think it's worth looking into to see if the university that you're applying to actually does have exams. The test that you need to take for law is called the LNAT. You should start preparing, I've heard, a year in advance because it's like the SAT reading section, but just a lot harder. And if it hasn't been mentioned already, usually if you want to take the test in Canada, you can go on Pearson VUE and try to find like a venue that's close to you.
Yeah, thank you so much to everyone for answering that UK question as well as all the questions in the application process. Now we'll be moving on into more general advice for our soon-to-be university applicants. So for the first question, we'd like to talk about your process and approach towards supplemental materials such as essays and portfolios. What advice would you give to students going into this process and what would you do differently?
Yeah, I can start us off. I think the one biggest and most helpful piece of advice that I got throughout the application process, and this is more so for the Common App essay for those of you applying to the US, is like if you think about like the one thing that like an admissions officer or even just like anyone you're meeting like needs to know about you, like what would that be? And then how would you capture that in your Common App essay? So for me, like when you think about that, it's not necessarily going to be like one extracurricular that you participate in, but really like what motivates you as a person. Like as someone applying to like the US, you're probably like really ambitious and you're looking to get ahead and there's a reason why you're applying. And I think it's really important for you to capture that motivation in your Common App essay. And then for me, especially like as a business, potential business student, this would really help contextualize my application. And like, to be frank, like why, like I stand out from like just the finance frat bro like culture. And like, I'm actually applying for like other reasons beyond just like, oh, I want like a high paying like career. So I think it's really important to just capture all your motivations there. And then one thing that I would do differently is I would try less to edit while I'm writing. I'm the type of person that like, I'll write like one sentence and then I'll think, oh, this isn't like a sentence I like. And it doesn't like sound perfect. And then like I would go back over on like that one sentence and just keep editing it. Whereas like you really want to just get like a flow of ideas onto paper and then go back and start editing things. As difficult as that may be for some people, I think it would have been beneficial if I'd done that. And then because I found that like when I actually did that, like my ideas just flowed really clearly. And I got a lot of like ideas that like came out that didn't sound so scripted or like just had to be written to perfection. So I would just spend a lot of time just writing like the thoughts that pop into your head straight up and then go back and edit it.
Yeah, I can add on. So UChicago's essay prompts are super, super annoying. I don't know if anyone has experience with them, but the questions are like, compare apples and oranges, or how do we compare apples and oranges? Where is Waldo? Stuff like that. An important thing for that is to just be yourself. Don't try to be overly quirky to show admissions officers that you think different. It's not going to work out, and it's very easy to see through that. That's a mistake I made when I went my first draft. I was trying to show them that, hey, I'm so mathematical, I think this way, and you know, no other student would think this way. Don't do that, it's super annoying. And yeah, again, be yourself. When I wrote my essay, and this is for the why one actually, the why essay is like, why do you want to come to our school? I was just super honest. I said, I want to come to your school because I want to live in a world where I can communicate with HAL 9000. He's like this villain in the movies, this robot. I want to communicate with HAL 9000 and dine with him at Hutchison Hall, which is a dining hall at Chicago. And then I explained my interest in computational neuroscience. I didn't try to show that, hey, I'm so different and quirky. Please don't do that. It's not going to work out for you, specifically for Chicago, because I guess there's a reputation that they look for that stuff. So yeah, again, just be true to yourself.
I can go next. I think that one of the best pieces of advice I got was to start early. And then I didn't take that advice at all and found myself on winter break cramming who God knows how many college essays, because I was like, okay, I'm going to apply to all these schools. And then I was here so stressed out of my mind. And I'm going to say this, if you can start early, but life gets in the way, school gets in the way, grade 12 is busy. If you find yourself in the position that I was, last minute, overwhelmed, so many things to do, my best piece of advice is just write down everything that you need to get done. I know that the US college application system can be very overwhelming because every school, I don't know why Princeton has like 8 or 9 supplemental essays or something crazy like that. Stanford has even more. Like, I remember just here looking at these, like, oh my God, how am I gonna get these all done? Write them down and just start writing, just start jotting ideas down, brainstorming. It can be really easy to fall down like a YouTube like rabbit hole of like reading my college essay on this and reading my essay that got me into here, which are like super helpful videos, especially like the why you want to, like, why do I want to go to Princeton? Why do you want to go to blank? Like those essay videos, super helpful because I think there are specific structures how to write a strong essay. But that being said, just try brainstorming, just start writing, because I think the more you think about how much you need to get done, the scarier it gets. So I remember I had a draft of my Common App essay. It was like 1 week before the application deadline and I rewrote it. And it's stressful and it's not ideal, but it's like not a linear process and it's not going to be perfect. So be easy on yourself. Just try and start early. Don't do what I did, but know that the things will get done and you have a support system around you.
I just wanted to chime in because the application process and especially supplemental essays is a lot different from the UK. So thankfully, you don't have to write a bunch of essays for each school. Instead, when you're on UCAS, which is the application portal that Andy pointed out, you get to choose 5 schools and you write 1 essay that goes out to all of them. So thank God for that. I think it's very different from the type of essay you'd write for an application in Canada and the US. Insofar as it's not meant to be really artsy or creative, it's actually more like a cover letter than it is anything. And it's just basically why the school should take you, but in a very like academic and professional sort of sense. So I think the main way people approach it is firstly look up examples online for essays for your specific degree program. You're going directly into a subject, so you're not going, for example, into a general degree and then honing down into a major. You're going directly into, for example, geography or international relations. So just knowing that nuance just helps your essay to be, or your personal statement just to be more specific. It's generally 4,000 characters, so it's about 600 words. The other thing is that there's what a lot of people refer to as the 80-20 divide. So 80% of your personal statement is usually focused on academic related achievements or academic related experiences that will help you in your degree program, and the 20% is devoted to extracurriculars. Note that this percentage is just an indication, and mine was a lot different. And I think what's really important is that I think what they're trying to get at is to see whether students understand the degree program that they're trying to go into. So even though I was studying law, I mentioned, for example, that I took AP Calculus, and I said that the decision or the I don't know, the mathematical reasoning required in AP Calculus has equipped me with a logical viewpoint of the world that I can, provide when evaluating text and things like that. So it's just to see how you use your experiences in previous academic sort of standpoints to approach the program that you're going into.
Yeah, thank you so much to all our panelists for answering that question. I'm sure it was something that a lot of the students were thinking about as well, because given how supplemental materials are a bit different for states in the UK in comparison to Canada, your answers are very insightful and helpful. So for the next question in the same category, how did you decide which teachers to ask for letters of recommendation, and how did you go about asking them for that recommendation?
So I can get started with this. I think that for me, what I focused on was using the recommendation letters to, number one, address any gaps in my application, and number two, support the themes that I had developed for myself through extracurriculars, essays, and things like that. So the first part of that, when I was applying to Stanford, I was applying test optional, so I never took the SAT or ACT, and I still wanted to demonstrate that I'd be able to handle college level academics, and I did have the academic rigor. So I had done research with a university professor in political science, and I asked them for a recommendation letter to demonstrate that I was able to engage in college level research as a high school student. And I think that that supported that part of my application. I think another side of that is when I was asking my teachers for recommendation letters, I would send them guidelines of previous letters that I'd worked. And I also created like a Google document where I listed specific qualities such as like intellectual curiosity, leadership, introspection, things like that. And underneath it, I provided examples of when I demonstrated that in or out of the classroom. And I related that specifically to my academic interests. So I wanted to study economics and political science, and I had teachers touch on anecdotes relating to these topics. And so I think it's really important to give your teachers specific guidelines and anecdotes of what they can write about, because a lot of times students just provide like a brag sheet of extracurriculars that they've done, but then what teachers do is they go in, they take those extracurriculars and they just add it to their letter, but that's not going to help you stand out, and it's just going to be reiterating what's already on your application. So I think that the power of anecdotes is that not only does it make your letter more specific and personalized, but it also connects more with the admission reader, and it makes the reader want to vouch for you if they do want to move you forward in the admission process. And then another piece of advice that I would give specifically for US schools is that if the university does not have like, so one piece of advice that I want to give is that if the university does not, so basically, if the university doesn't have like any specific requirements, so if they don't say like you have to give a letter from this specific teacher in a specific grade, then if they only give recommendations, I think that it's okay if you kind of deviate from those recommendations and do what you think is best for you. So for instance, for me, when I was applied to Stanford, a lot of traditional advice was that you should only ask grade 11 or 12 teachers, and they should be in one area in this, like in the humanities, and one in STEM. But for me personally, I felt like the teachers that I was closest with didn't all meet that criteria. So I ended up asking 2 STEM teachers, and I also asked one teacher who had taught me from grade 7 to 10, where I was like in a different high school before I moved to a new one. And because she had known me for a long time, and because we had kept in touch, she ended up writing a very strong letter. And I think that even though Stanford recommends asking grade 11 and 12 teachers, that grade 10 teacher's recommendation ended up being a lot more powerful than if I'd asked another grade 11 teacher. So definitely don't worry about not always sticking to the recommendations if it's not a hard requirement, because at the end of the day, most letters of recommendation do turn out to be like quite generic or like standard positive. So if yours is a bit different from the norms, but stands out a lot more, is a lot more specific, that's going to help you a lot in the process.
Thank you so much for that really insightful answer. All right, do we have any other panelists willing to jump on for this question?
I guess I can add a little bit to that. Obviously, a lot
Sure,
of the things are, well, they're going to be repeated, but for me, I think the main thing that I looked for was essentially, well, number one, as I'm studying physics, I needed a teacher who knew me well and knew my ability in that subject. So I chose my physics teacher for that. But I think the more important thing is you need teachers that like really know you well. Like past the academics and all that. They know you as a person, and well, it really helps to build that relationship prior to the application. But I think even if you can't find teachers that fit both, having being in your interest and know you well, I think I'd go with the latter. With if you have teachers that know you well, they can definitely speak to more aspects about your application, but aside from your academics, which you likely would have demonstrated in other parts of the application already.
Thank you. All right. So I think that wraps up that section. So lastly, let's consider another very important aspect of attending university, which is funding your education. So my first question for our wonderful panelists in this section is, for many high school students, considering the different types of institutions, such as Ivy League, public and private, how does the financial aid vary? And was the type of institution ever a significant factor upon finalizing your university or college decision?
I'm just going to jump in for Tom here. He sent me his notes because I think he had to hop off real quick. I think the biggest consideration usually is between like public and private schools in the US, in terms of like private schools tend to have like larger endowment funds that can provide a little bit more financial aid. And so specifically, it's really important, I think, to research each school in particular, especially if you're applying as an international student. So for example, I'm Canadian citizen, like I don't have US citizenship. And so like that differs between schools in terms of some being like need aware for international students versus need blind. So for example, like Penn's policy is like they are need blind if you're a permanent resident or citizen of the US, Canada, or Mexico, but then they're need aware if you apply from anywhere else. So definitely I would say do specific research into each institution, because even amongst like a certain bracket, if for example on the slide it says like Ivy League, even across like the Ivy League, like every school will kind of have a different policy. So definitely really important to do your research there.
Thank you. Anyone else want to hop on and talk about this?
I can just speak for the international experience at NYU, I guess. So NYU as a school is need blind, but NYU is not need blind for international students. However, I don't think it's impossible to get financial aid as an international student applying for NYU. But because they are not need blind to international students, that means that when NYU gets your application as an international student, they will see that you have requested for financial aid. And that can't possibly help you in any way, just to be very honest. When I applied, I was fortunate enough to be in a situation where I didn't need to, indicate that I applied for financial aid, but I would have liked it. But that was a strategic, quote unquote, trade-off I had to make because I just really wanted to go to NYU. For my friends who do have some sort of financial aid, I know that you have to indicate that when you apply, and if you don't indicate that when you apply / get in, you can't later on reapply for it. So like, let's say your financial situation changes drastically in your third year as an international student, that's just rough. There's nothing you can do about it. So it does exist, but for international students at NYU, but it is quite rare, and that's something I would consider thinking more about when you are applying for NYU specifically.
Yeah, and one last thing is some schools might be need blind, but let's say you get waitlisted, that might change. I don't think that's the case with like the big Ivies, but with like some smaller schools, for example, actually I can't think of anything off the top of my mind, but let's say you do get waitlisted and you did apply for financial aid, some of them might not be blind anymore. And so that's also something to consider.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very important thing to consider. So on the same topic, we've touched on this a little bit already, but we'll just elaborate on it. As an international student, can you elaborate on any scholarships or financial aid that you received and how you applied for those?
So if there is another panelist who has received scholarships, they'll probably be able to, or multiple scholarships, they'll probably be able to add a little bit more detail to this. But I just wanted to say something to note is that as a Canadian citizen, you are not going to be eligible to apply to most scholarships in the US. And then in Canada, the scholarships that exist for you usually require that you attend a Canadian university. So that's a problem that I personally ran into. You might have better luck looking at some private companies that offer scholarships, or perhaps if you look at your parents' place of employment, if they have some financial opportunities or scholarships that they provide for students, you can look through those avenues. But for the big scholarships that exist in both countries, it's a little bit difficult to navigate that as an international student. So that's just something to be mindful of if you do think that you'll rely on scholarships. And another thing that you should be a little aware of or cautious of is that your scholarship is usually transferred directly to the school and considered alongside your financial aid. So sometimes it can affect the financial aid that you're receiving depending on the school. So you might be able to find scholarships that don't require that you report to the school, but I believe most schools still ask that you tell them. So this is something you have to just be aware of. So for example, if you receive a certain amount of financial aid and then you receive a scholarship, you might end up receiving less in the package because you now have additional funds that can contribute to your tuition, if that makes sense. So that's just something that I had to find out about, and it was a little bit difficult for me to navigate. So I would say that's something that everyone should be cautious of when they look at scholarships.
I can jump in as well. So again, a little bit of a different situation for me. I am living in Toronto, coming from Toronto, but I was born in the US, so I am a US citizen. So I was able to receive financial aid and scholarship money from New York University. However, obviously tuition is still very expensive in the US. So I did go out through 2 outside scholarships, which I was fortunate enough to receive 2 from Canada. So my advice would be definitely go as well through those private companies. A lot of big organizations you don't actually know about, but they do have scholarship funds or scholarship applications for youth that you can apply to. One just general tip to keep in mind for scholarships overall is that even if a scholarship seems like the application process is easier, it's probably going to be a lot harder to get the scholarship. Like you might see those scholarships that are like, write a phrase about why you took the degree and win $5,000. It's easier, so more people are going to apply, and it's less likely that you're going to receive the money. You actually rather go through the scholarships that have you write all those essays or go through all that process, because that means that you're showing a little bit more of yourself in those scholarships. And so it's a little bit more higher of a chance that you might actually receive that money. So go through those private companies. If you also go just you can not always have to go through those like scholarship portals or websites. I forget the names of the Canadian ones, but again, those ones might be catered towards Canadian universities. If you just search up scholarships for your field, like for example, I did a lot of art scholarships. There are certain organizations that you'll find that will do like private scholarships catered towards those fields. So as long as you're going into a degree for that, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to pursue a degree in Canada. You might be eligible for those. So it's definitely tough. I would say go in not expecting that you're not going to get anything, just because that's the more realistic way things are going to go. It's very rare for you to be able to get as much scholarship money as you actually want, but just keep applying. There's no harm in, if you find something and you think you might be eligible, send in something. You can even reuse scholarship essays if they're applicable to different organizations or applications, and you never know what might happen. So that's, I think, the biggest advice I could give.
Yeah, and I think that concludes all of our questions, or our pre-planned questions for today. So thank you so much to all of our panelists again for sharing so much of their experience and insight about the process. I'm sure we all learned something new about how different it is to apply to the States or internationally, as opposed to applying to school in Canada. Now it's time to transition into the breakout room session of today's panel, where attendees will be asking any questions you may still have that we haven't covered yet. I'll be opening up the breakout rooms in a minute, and our panelists will be separated into breakout rooms by subject, as shown on the screen. Breakout rooms will be open to about 3:45, and once they close, we will invite you all back to the main room to join us for our raffle and closing notes.
Hello, everyone. All right, so as we wait for our attendees, trickle in, I think we have all of our panelists here who are supposed to be in this breakout room. And just a reminder, this is the STEM breakout room. So for our attendees, now is the time to ask in the chat if you have any other questions. to a specific panelist or to just everyone in general, and panelists, you'll have the opportunity to answer any questions that come your way. So if you have a question, just type it up in the chat. To start us off, we had a lot of attendees. We had some attendees submit questions before the panel, and a really common question was regarding AP and IB programs and any other maybe extracurricular programs or classes that you took. So if any of our panelists took those programs, would you be able to speak about your experience and if they helped you get into the university that you are ultimately going to, or to speak about any advice that you have regarding that?
I mean, I did the IB program, so I can talk about that. Personally, for me, I just wanted a more enriched high school experience. I never thought about it with correlation to applying to university. I think honestly, it was a big help. Of course, there were like really stressful moments, especially during COVID and like having to take exams, even when the academic kids didn't have to. But grade inflation definitely made my transcript look a lot better. And like getting to write these papers, especially like doing your own research, was an interesting experience. And I think in a way kind of helps help me get into the STEM world like within my extracurriculars. But overall, I don't think it's that big of a deal as long as you work hard. I think these programs can work to your benefit.
Yeah, I can talk a bit about that too, because I ended up doing both AP and IB. So essentially the way that it worked for me was I took AP courses in the courses for IB that I did in SL. Especially so something like math and physics. Bayview doesn't offer the higher level standard for those. So I took the APs on top of that. And because of the content is so similar for both the AP and the IB, especially the higher level stuff, it's really transferable. So you can do something like HL Chem and you can also do AP Chem at the same time, and they're basically going to cover the same content aside from a couple of other things that you might need to study for. So I don't think it's ever a bad idea to do both. And it's also like if you're an IB school, then it's pretty easy to find an AP school to do your testing at. You have to pay the money obviously, but that goes with any AP school. So that's not really anything special. But yeah, if you're an IB school, you can just go, because there's AP schools in York region. You can ask them, you can go to their office and you can ask them to take the AP test there, and more often than not, they will let you do it.
Thank you. Okay, so we're getting some questions in the chat. So our first question is, has a job experience you had in high school helped you in any way during the application process?
I think I can talk about that a little bit. I don't think having a job directly will help you in the application process alone, but I think the lessons and the stories you get out of having a job could be important in terms of developing your own story, and also just having like life lessons by themselves. So for me, I coached basketball for 5 years throughout high school, and it's something I was really passionate about. Like it was a really small thing for me. It was nothing significant, but just something I really enjoyed, and that turned out to be a huge cornerstone of my whole story that I wanted to tell to the admission officer. Obviously, you never know what got you into college, because there are just so many factors that play into it. But I think what's really important about having a job in high school is one, the lessons you learn, and two, is like the stories you be able to tell from having more whole experiences that the other might not have. Also, it's nice to make money, buy something for yourself.
Thank you. Okay, I think we can move on to the next question, which is why did you want to study in America instead of Canada? And what were like the main advantages you experienced in American institutions?
So I can start this off. So for me personally, I think I did a lot of research about the different kinds of cultures at schools in America versus Canada. And I think Canadian schools definitely emphasize like academics and I mean, I haven't attended a Canadian university, but from what I've heard and seen from my friends, I feel like the experience is a little different because it's more individual. You kind of go to class, you go to your lecture. You don't have to really get involved in other parts of university life if you don't want to. Whereas in American schools, you know, they have a lot of school events, football games, things like that. People come out to. A lot of people, especially at top schools, are involved in extracurriculars and student organizations outside of academics. And there's just a big emphasis on sort of being well-rounded. As you can see, even in the application process with holistic admissions versus in Canada, how they emphasize academics more. And I wanted that sort of holistic experience a little bit more, which is why American universities were a little more attractive to me personally.
Yeah, I think for me, I only applied to the private schools in the States because, to be frank, when I was in high school, I had no idea what I wanted to study or what I was interested in doing after 4 years in school. So I really wanted the opportunity to explore different fields of academics and be able to have that freedom to choose and really go kind of take the courses I wanted to and find a educational path that's most fitting for myself, which is why I kind of only apply to the private, smaller size schools. I think what's also nice about being in these seemingly prestige institutions is a network that you get from the alum, from the people around you. Also, for the most part, the people at my school, most of them are pretty smart, if not the smartest in the world. So I'm constantly impressed by the people around me and feel like there's always something to learn about the person literally who's sitting next to you during class. Could be like a physics medalist of the world or something. Is a really interesting experience for me.
Thank you. All right, so our next question is, did any of you self-study for AP classes, and do you think it's worth doing this?
So I self-studied for 2 APs because they were not offered at my school. And I figured that it would be a way to add academic rigor to my application and challenge myself beyond the curriculum that was provided at my high school. I think it's worth doing if you are not, like if you have the resources available to you. So if you have like a teacher who can help you in your self-study, if you have access to some books that could help you, then I feel like it could be worth doing. But I don't think it would make or break your application at all. I think it's just another way to add, you know, something special to your application, show universities that you're able to conduct yourself in this manner and sort of strive for what's beyond what's already offered to you. So I self-studied AP Bio and Chem. They were difficult to self-study for sure on top of regular classes, but I think if you think it's available, like resources are available to you and self-studying is available to you, then I would do it.
Yeah, I think I touched upon this earlier, but like for me, again, the IB subjects and the AP subjects, if you take them on the same subject, it's not going to be that difficult to add a little bit of content to study for the AP. So for me, it wasn't that tough, and it was definitely worth it. But yeah, like it's not gonna be the one thing that accepts you or rejects you from any school.
On a similar note, did any of you not take AP or the IB program? And if so, how did you show universities that you were ready for their school and keeping up with the coursework?
I think if you
I think we
don't,
all did, right?
oh, okay, I'll just quickly
Oh,
say
sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
I think if you don't have the programs available to you, or if it's not something that you ended up doing, you can show academic rigor through your extracurriculars as well. Like if you end up doing research outside of school, like research is inherently academic, that will help you for sure. If you end up doing like science fairs and things like that outside of school, like your extracurriculars can show that you're ready for their coursework academically as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be a class. You can audit a college course outside of school or something like that as well. So there are ways to do it outside of traditional AP IB curriculums.
All right, and another common question that we got from our attendees during registration was regarding the so-called spike. So did any of you have a spike in your application? How did you demonstrate that? And would you say that that's something like necessarily important to have?
So I think I had a pretty clear spike in science and bio specifically. And I think at the beginning of your high school career, you're going to be trying new things. So you don't have to worry too much about picking a specific subject that early on. But then a spike basically means like don't try to involve yourself in every single activity that you come across. Just pick a few things that you like. So that's the way that you show a spike. If you like science, just reach out to, sorry about the noise, reach out to academic opportunities that fit the subject that you're interested in. So for me, that was bio. Again, like I mentioned, science fair, stuff like that.
Thank you. Okay, and another question that was really common among our registrants was regarding crafting the actual personal statement and the essays. So could you talk a little bit about how much time you dedicated to crafting your applications? Was it difficult to balance this with school? And what are some tips that you might have regarding this process?
Okay, so honestly, for me, I'm a terrible example. I probably wrote my essays like 2 weeks, or like I started them maybe like 3 weeks before I applied, or like finished them literally the day of. So definitely start earlier. But yeah, honestly, it was just really stressful because with IB grade 12, like for us in December, that was when a lot of our papers were due and a lot of tests and, like trying to keep your grades up. So throughout like the winter holidays and Christmas, like I was sitting there writing my essays. And so there really wasn't much time to do anything else other than like write papers and write essays.
Yeah, I started my application, I think a month before the deadline. And I mean, like, so yeah, I spent probably towards the end of it, I probably spent more than like 2 or 3 hours a day writing it. I remember writing and rewriting it quite a bit. But definitely I also crammed it, so I don't really have much else here.
Thank you. Okay. Another question that we got in the chat was how can we find research opportunities in high school? Or are there any other STEM opportunities you recommend?
The best way to find research opportunities is just to mass email mass email professors at local universities. If there are hospitals near you and there are doctors listed on their website that have labs, like PIs of the labs, you can email them. Just look through their website and see what research interests you, and then you can find cold email templates online and just send out a bunch of emails. A lot of them won't respond, but some of them will, and then once one responds, that's all you need.
Yeah, another thing, so and this is specific for physics, so but there should probably be some similar organizations. There's one called STEM Fellowship, and they run this competition called CAYPT. And essentially it's like it's a physics tournament, and it's centered around like research questions or like phenomena in the real world, where and your goal is essentially to basically do research. It's like you build an experiment, and then you investigate the 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 experiment. And so yeah, there's like opportunities like that which you can definitely talk about in your application, which will come off as essentially research. But yeah, the other alternative would be to email professors of universities and then just hope that they respond. Again, it's going to be you you're not going to get that many responses, obviously, as you're a high school student. So don't be afraid to send something like 50 to 100 emails to different professors, and just hope that one gets back to you.
Also, another thing, like in the professors that did respond to my emails, a lot of them commented on, computer skills. So for example, if you know how to code using Python or MATLAB, then that will definitely be something that they will pay attention to, and they will be more likely to respond to you.
Thank you for your really good advice. So another question that we had in the chat was, how did you decide whether you wanted to apply early decision, early action, or regular decision, and depending on how you applied to the schools you got into?
Yeah, I think personally for me, the early decision slash action part was mostly for the school that I really wanted to go to. So probably my dream school. For the people who don't know, like there are two parts of your US application. The first round is like early decision slash early action. So early decision is like you apply to one school. If you get in, you have to go. It's like a commitment. And early action is separated into like restrictive and non-restrictive. So if it's restrictive, then you can only apply to one school early, but you're not binded to go to the one school. And usually it's like a private, you can only apply to one private institution, and the regular decision is self-explanatory, just regular. I think for me, and then I think the common thing is the early round, you really want to apply to the school that you really want to go to. So one, you have more time to prepare for that. And two, if you land in that school, then you save a lot of time worrying about your regular applications. And for me, I really want to go to Stanford. So Stanford only had early action. So I applied, but it turned out to be a stupid mistake because Stanford has a ton of people who apply early. So you probably better off applying regular to Stanford. And I got rejected. So I was very sad for a long time. But I think a rule of thumb is find a school that you really want to go to and make that your top priority in the early round.
All right, thank you. So another question that we got in the chat was, do you have any career aspirations or plans after undergrad? Which is also a really important thing to consider when picking a school.
I can talk about myself here. For right now, my plan is currently probably to continue doing research. So I already have a professor that I'm currently working under, and I'm really interested in that. So for me, that's probably currently the plan. But obviously things can change, and I mean, I always have a backup plan. So if I graduate and I don't feel like I'm suitable for research, you can always go find like a normal job. As I'm studying computer science, you can probably find one at like one of those tech companies, and they pay pretty well as well. So that's also a thing to consider.
Yeah, I think this is a really good question because personally for me, when I was applying to schools, I never thought about like employment, which is probably something you should be thinking about since like I guess for most people is like your career aspiration is the end product of your education. And for me, I applied as a physics major. I switched major 4 times my first semester, and I'm now studying financial engineering, which is basically applied math at Princeton. And I think one thing I want to highlight is being an international student studying in the US is more difficult to find internships, especially in your first 2 summers. At least that's my personal experience. Just because of visa stuff and especially if you're a non-diversity background, is generally pretty hard to find internships in the US and sometimes in Canada as well, because they are more inclined to take local students. But I would definitely think once you get into your school, there are probably two things that you should be thinking about. One is your academic kind of pursuit, and through that you also want to understand like what kind of fields are you most interested in, and also start early to get to know different fields that are out there, and what you probably will most enjoy doing. For me, I'm a startup, so I'm currently in finance. This summer I've been doing research on asset pricing, and next summer I'll be going to investment banking at JP Morgan. So yeah, total startup from the physics dude that I started out being, but which is totally okay. So things change. I think that's also something that we should all, keep in mind when you go into universities.
Thank you for sharing. And just to kind of round things out, because we have about a couple more minutes left, could you talk a little bit about what other considerations maybe you had when picking a school, when applying to schools, and just share any last bits of advice that you have? Maybe if you could do this process again, what do you wish you would have known?
This might not be a consideration for everyone, but it kind of was for me when it came down to making a decision. The location of the school, because I really like the city that my school is in. It actually reminds me a lot of my hometown, so I got comfortable there very fast. That might be something that you want to consider. I haven't heard that said yet, so that's just a small thing.
Yeah, I think for me, I guess this will be kind of cheesy, but after going through the whole process and its ups and downs, I think everything is meant to work out the way they're supposed to work out. I know it sounds kind of like weird that like is us talking about it, who's like, I guess had a somewhat successful outcome through the whole process. But I think this is generally true for almost everyone that I've spoken with, who's gone through this pretty tedious process. Is really doesn't matter where you end up, you will have a pretty good life ahead of you. You enjoy wherever you're studying, you make a lot of new friends, and you probably be very happy 3 to 5 years down the road. Doesn't matter what school rejected you or what school that you wish you got into. I think a lot of that fade after even just 1 or 2 semesters on campus. So I think that's something I really didn't think of. I think it's really hard to be aware of that when you're in the zone. But I think I just want to put it out there, so to letting you guys also like mine, I guess, is that doesn't matter where you end up, you'll be pretty happy. I think you should also like keep that in the back of your mind when you're working through stuff. Obviously work hard, but I'm a firm believer of no matter where you end up, you guys will probably all be pretty happy and get a pretty outcome out of this.
Got a quick question. How do you guys manage to note take in your classes?
I think for a lot of people in my classes, they like to use iPads or tablets to take their notes. I think it's very easy to carry and is pretty convenient. For me, I'm an old school pen and paper person, which is, I guess, kind of hard to find these days in my classes. Also not good for the environment, but I think once you develop a habit, you just stick to it. But I recommend getting a tablet. It's just a lot easier than carrying pen and paper around.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about iPad is it's basically a portable pen and paper. So, because if you have an Apple Pencil, then it just works, or any kind of pencil, it works the same way. And yeah, so also with computer science classes, I use my computer to take notes, because obviously typing or writing code out by hand is just not the most ideal thing. So using your computer for that. And like in high school, I mostly type my notes. That's in part because of COVID. But even outside of COVID, I like to type my notes mainly just because first of all, I type pretty fast. I type faster than I can write, so it's easier for me to get information down. But it's also just easier to organize, at least for me, on like an online or an electronic OneNote, for instance, an electronic app, as opposed to notebooks, which I honestly tend to lose pretty often.
Yeah, save trees.
On that note, would you also be able to talk a little bit about the overall transition to university? So did high school prepare you at all? And what would you suggest current high schoolers do to kind of smooth the transition?
I think most people would agree that it's a really big jump. For me personally, I felt like it was very different, and there are a few skills that you develop in high school that you carry over, but a lot of it is just figuring out how to be in a new environment, fast-paced environment around a lot of people who are just like you for the first time. I think the biggest thing is making sure you have resources around you to help you if you do struggle, because you probably will struggle a little in the first semester. So whether that looks like reaching out to your professors for help, for extra help, going to office hours if you can't keep up with the content right away, whether that is like personal support network if you're stressed out, just making sure you have people to lean on in the first semester or first year, because it is a really big change.
Yeah, I can speak to the academic side. The pace of a lot of the courses in university are going to be a lot faster than what you're used to in high school. So for instance, for my physics class, I think they covered like all of AP in the first like month or so, and then we're ready onto new content that I've never really seen before. So the pace is definitely one thing that you need to get used to. The other thing is, yeah, like don't be afraid to ask for help. Going into university, I never really took a computer science course prior to that, so doing the CS courses there were definitely a lot harder. But there's always going to be help for you, and you just have to be willing to go ask TAs and professors for that help, and they'll be happy to explain to you.
Also, definitely lean on older students if you can, whether that's students in your dorm. They usually have like peer advisors that you can reach out to as well. Definitely look to them.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Go, Jerry. Go.
Oh, sorry, I was gonna say that you also get a lot more time in university than you do in high school. For example, I think over the last 2 years, I have like on average maybe like 3 hours of class a day, and like honestly, like half the time I don't even go to classes. So that's like a lot of hours in your day that you can do whatever you want. So having the mindset, having the habit of to time manage and to plan your day out and to think about what you want to do, what you want to pursue in your free time, I think is a very important skill to learn once you get into university.
I actually jumped in here with like one final question that I actually had. So I know for STEM like programs, a lot of people tend to have like a lot of like contests and things like that. So like academic contests, such as math contests, physics contests. And I was wondering, as like an incoming grade 12 student or in rising senior, would you recommend continuing to do those contests and dedicating that much time to like quote unquote grind if like results for like stuff like the AMC math contest and things like that come out after the application deadline?
I mean, in that case, I think for contests who have results after the application deadline, I don't think it's helpful in terms of like applying to schools. But obviously, I think learning is always helpful whether you get a result out of it or not. But practically speaking, if something that if the result comes out after the deadline, I don't think it's helpful. Two, if you don't think put in like 10 hours a day will give you a really significant result in your final year, I don't think that's a good allocation of time either, because I think in your last year of high school, there's so many more things to focus on. I think also something that we haven't mentioned before is grade 12 was one of the best years of my life. So take time to hang out with your friends and really enjoy your last year of being a boss in high school. Pretty sick.
Yeah, definitely. For contests like the AMC, I think, yeah, I don't think you really need to focus on that as much as you did in previous years. But I do know some universities do give you the chance after the fact, like after you submitted your application, to add in supplemental things, like as contest scores and stuff come in. So that might be an option. But overall, I think by the time that your contest score comes back, they've either already made a decision on your application, or they're close to it, and adding that won't really change much. So I think overall you should probably relax a little bit on the contests, but I mean you can still try, and if you still get scores, you can probably submit them later on.
Yeah, and also something else is like what Jerry said, if you're waitlisted, and a lot of them will ask you to write back to them about any achievements, and if you do really well, that could definitely change your decision potentially. But like I think this year waitlist barely moved, so even if you do, the chances are pretty slim. Might as well enjoy high school.
Yeah, sounds good. I think that pretty much concludes all of the questions. I'll be closing the breakout rooms now, and they automatically close in 60 seconds. So if anyone does have like any final thoughts or things like that, feel free to ask within that last minute. But other than that, thank you so much to our panelists for answering all of the questions. And I think it did really help a lot of us who are stressing about university applications, especially if you're a grade 12 student, because I know August or this summer especially is like that quote unquote last time to grind. So yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Andrew. I'm going into NYU next year, so I don't have many clubs to talk about. I think I still have to go in there and like figure out what I want to do. But some of the clubs that Jenny just mentioned sound really interesting, so I think I'll look into those. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you for those introductions. So if anyone in this breakout has any questions for our panelists, feel free to drop them in the chat or just unmute. But yeah, we have a couple questions for you guys as well. To start off, does anyone want to talk about what like a typical day will look like for you? Like in regards to like course load, classes you enjoy, yeah. Anyone?
Okay, I guess I'll go ahead. I feel like I'm like, sorry, I feel like I'm not a good example because I don't go to any of my lectures. I am passing, by the way, just like as a disclaimer, I am passing all my courses, but I don't go to any of my lectures. So I don't wake up like early at all. I think my earliest tutorial at one point was at 10 a.m., but then he rescheduled that, like the tutor, because I don't think he like wanted to deal with us at 10 a.m., which is like perfectly fair. So I think he rescheduled that to like 12 p.m. So normal day, wake up at like maybe like 10 a.m. if I'm lucky. Like sometimes it goes to like 3 or 4 p.m. Depending on like how bad my sleep schedule has gotten. So it usually like is just do like an hour or two of work if I have something due like within the next couple of days. Basically, I try to get it done hopefully like a day beforehand. Usually ends up being like finish it right before the tutorial, I'll send it off. But sometimes I get my stuff done in advance. So it's usually something like that. If I have a tutorial that day, I'll go and attend the tutorial. Usually I grab like lunch or dinner with my friends, just because like all the first years live on like a college, like in a college building together. So it's really easy for us to like literally go and like knock on someone's door and be like, hey, we're going for lunch now, and then just like go someplace. And then usually I have a bunch of free time, which I spend on either A, like extracurriculars, B, napping, or like C, occasionally we'll like go do something fun like in the actual town of Oxford itself. And then yeah, that's I guess like in summary, that's like what it is. Sometimes like there are big events and stuff. So usually like that'll take up most of my day. So if, for example, one of the extracurriculars that I'm part of is hosting an event, then usually there's like a lot of prep in advance for that. But yeah, like that's what a typical day looks like.
Thank you for that. I think that was like, that helps like a lot of us get a good idea of like what I guess a typical day would look like in a business program. But yeah, Stephanie will ask the next question. Oh, Victor, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to ask a question that may relate a bit more to UPenn because I know UPenn values interdisciplinary approach. So I was wondering, like, in your applications, were there any fields other than business that you really emphasized?
So in my application, I talked about being interested in a lot of different things, but like not really like, okay, let me think of how to describe this. Like, I think I described the fact that like I have a multitude of different interests and I was like looking for a place that will allow me to kind of like blend those and like go and explore all those different pathways. Because in particular, I was like, oh, I'm kind of like interested in like social sciences and exploring a little bit of like poli-sci, that type of thing. But then I'm also kind of like, oh, what if I do something in like computer science or data science? So I was kind of like referencing that. Yeah, and when I applied, I originally applied as like a behavioral economics major at Penn, if that helps.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Victor. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a quick follow-up. So for your interest, did you have any extracurriculars that like emphasize those, or were you just mostly referencing them in the application?
Yeah, for sure. So I did DECA in high school and I really liked DECA. So I was like, all right, DECA. And then I also was involved with this like youth publication thing that was like more like international relations focused. It was kind of like youth journalism, that type of thing. And so then that's where like the whole like, oh, perhaps poli-sci, thinking about like global affairs type of thing came in. But I didn't really like reference that too much in my app. But it was more so just kind of like, yeah, I have a lot of different interests.
Okay, I don't want to mispronounce your name, so go ahead.
Yeah, so I just had a question for all the panelists. So especially like universities such as the ones you're attending, and there's like a norm in which you're supposed to like have a high grade in comparison to like your classmates, and having like extracurriculars which demonstrate your interests. So I was wondering like what tools you use to manage both like having extracurriculars and academics, and like making sure that both.
Sorry, I guess clarifying question. Do you mean like managing extracurriculars and grades going like applying for college, or like managing extracurricular grades in college applying for jobs?
Like as a high school student going into college.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think honestly, okay, I'm not gonna say like, because I did a bunch of extracurriculars and some I definitely did because I thought it would look good on like my application. But I think doing extracurriculars is honestly a really great way of knowing what you're interested in. And if you can have that personal connection to something you're passionate about, I think that's something that will, one, make you want to do it, so you will manage that time effectively. And two, when you write a personal statement, it's going to be that much more compelling. I honestly don't know what to say about managing your time and like, your grades, because I was so stressed out in high school. I literally got chronic digestion issues. Honestly, I would say though, like at some point it is worth asking yourself why you're doing what you're doing. And I think that can help you at least internally know how you should allocate your time and your priorities. But yeah, Google Calendar, fantastic. Have a planner, write down your due dates as soon as you get them.
Yeah, I'll jump on there. I think that Google Calendar really helped out for me, just knowing like the amount of time that I needed to dedicate to like each thing like in my calendar. It got pretty gnarly at times. Like my Google Calendar, I would have like time blocks, like I would literally schedule like chunks of time to do like each thing. And then by doing that, I really got a sense of like, okay, like this is how my day is going to work. And like if my homework is going to take like 2 hours and then my extracurriculars take like 1 hour, then it all kind of blocks out, and then it works to like kind of prevent procrastination, because like you kind of set yourself a goal that like you're going to finish like you're studying like for a particular test in like the next 2 hours or so. So I think that just know your priorities and really allocating time efficiently and kind of being disciplined. Easier said than done. Obviously, there were times where I scheduled things and just completely didn't really follow through with my calendar. But I think that if I had to do it again, then that's definitely like the way that I would do to balance out my extracurriculars and my academics.
Well, I'm being like incentivized to use Google Calendar after this. Okay, I think we can go to Aricia. I don't know if I'm mispronouncing again.
Oh, it's Arisha, but no problem.
Sorry. Okay.
It's okay, no worries. My question was like, would you say that like business competitions such as like FBLA and DECA are like, I guess, indicative of what the business world is actually like? Like, let's say I really like DECA and FBLA. Like, would that be enough for me to be like, oh, I should go into the business world then?
I think, okay, so I'm biased here because I used to be part of FBLA. However, I'm gonna like try and like clarify what your question is a little bit. And I know that like you might not like have an answer to this just because there's so much that you just don't get the opportunity to do as a high school student. But what exactly do you mean by the business world? Because different parts of quote unquote like the business world are really, really different. Like even some people, like talking specifically, this might be a little bit like techie, but there's this thing called like a product or like a project manager, and people with the same title at a lot of different places are going to do completely different things. So what specifically like are you talking about, or are you just wondering if like DECA and FBLA, if liking that is enough to kind of choose go into a business major?
Yeah, sorry, I meant like, is it enough to choose to go into business?
I feel like yes, but just because you like DECA and FBLA doesn't mean you wouldn't be necessarily better at something else. Like I know a lot of people who went into DECA like specifically because it was going to be a fun time with all of their friends, but they ended up going into medicine instead. But I think what DECA does allow you to do is you can build a lot of good like impromptu speaking skills with that, which I guess you don't really get as much well, it depends like what you do within DECA. But if, for example, like you're out here like doing presentations, that might be more prepared. But then within DECA, you get more of a chance to kind of practice what happens when someone asks you a question that you're not prepared for, or if someone like throws you like a total curveball, you need to figure out how to like save yourself without exposing that you don't know anything.
Okay, thank you.
I feel like I can follow up on that slightly with my own experience, because I say that like, oh, I decided I wanted to apply to like study business post-secondary because I did DECA, but also I think it's important to underscore the fact that I don't think I actually knew what business was in high school. I was just kind of like, I like doing my role plays. This is cool. But then I went to Penn, and I feel like when you go to an undergrad business school, suddenly you realize that there's like one of like 3 pathways that you kind of get funneled into, where it's like, okay, I will either become an investment banker, I will go into consulting, or if I'm like like straying away from the pack, maybe I'll go into like PE, so like private equity after college. Or there's like an even smaller number that will go into say like tech. So for example, what Stephanie was saying with like product management, or say something like more retail focused. And so I didn't realize that until I like started college, and I was like, wow, would you look at that? It's like not, I actually don't even know what I was expecting, but that was a new experience. And I think another thing to consider too is that I think, at least from people I know, there are people who I know who are studying like English and like liberal arts things, but are still recruiting for like consulting, investment banking, that type of thing. So it's not necessarily always a matter of like your major dictates what your career is going to be. I feel like there's a lot of like leeway in that sense. And I think beyond that, there's a nice thing about US colleges is that you do have a lot of time to explore and choose. So for example, at Penn, you can't even take a finance course until your sophomore year. So I say I'm majoring in finance, having never taken corporate finance or like anything in the progression, but it's just something that I think I'm interested in, but there's like a lot of space to explore. I hope that fills it in a little.
Yeah, that really helps.
Sorry, just to jump in, I also did DECA in high school, and I was like, I very much was like, I did marketing, like I did MTDM, like I did marketing team decision making, and I was like, wow, I love marketing. I went in, took my first college marketing course, and literally like dropped marketing so fast. But honestly, I do think that the experience of doing DECA, like a lot of the skills I realized I had or had developed during DECA, I do think they translate quite well into like business. So it's like, I think doing business, like if you do DECA and you're like, I'm good at these things and I want to make a lot of money, like, yeah, do business. Because I went into DECA and I was like, I'm pretty good at public speaking. I think fast on my feet and I'm like great at communicating and coming up with like problem solving and strategies. Wow, consulting is a great way to make money. That kind of helped me make my decision on whether or not I wanted to do business school. But you know, you don't have to think about those things so early on.
All right, thank you so much. Oh, Victor, go ahead.
Yeah, if we have time, I did also just want to ask about like what your thoughts are between balancing APs and extracurriculars, because the situation that I find myself in right now is I am putting a much larger emphasis on ECs. So I was wondering, like, roughly how important do you think APs are, especially for the US? If you'd like say you don't have that many APs offered in your school.
I think as far as I'm aware, I'm pretty sure Jenny, Stephanie, and I did IB in high school, and then I'm not sure about Andrew.
Yeah, I did AP, so I can talk a bit about that. Like my honest take here is, especially if you're going into grade 12 and you're looking at APs, they won't actually see your scores until after you get in. And I don't think they're going to rescind an offer because you didn't get an AP score. So a lot of people actually, they like say they're doing the APs, and then like by the time they get into uni, they don't study for it and then they just drop it. And like I've never seen anyone get punished for it, to be honest. So I don't think it's that big of a deal. And then also the thing about APs is like the course, like some of the exams are definitely difficult. However, I don't think the bar is that high to get a good score. For example, like for my calculus BC test, like I left only like a couple of sections blank on the free response, and then like I still got a 5. So it's like you don't have to know like everything. So I would say like throughout the year, like spending your time on your extracurriculars is, I think, the way to go. And then perhaps after you've applied, you have some time to start looking at APs, especially like right before like the APs come up. But yeah, I would say prioritize your extracurriculars over APs if you can.
Oh, and then one like small piece of advice, if your school doesn't have everything that you like want, go to another school. And I don't mean like switch schools. I mean like literally show up and ask them if you can take one of their AP exams as like someone who's not like studying it at their school. Because I did IB and I managed to take APs by literally going to a neighboring high school and being like, can I write my APs here? And they were like, yeah, go for it.
All right, thank you for that. If anybody had any more questions, if not, we had a question. Were there, I know we kind of touched on this, but were there any like competitions or programs you participated in university, or before university that you believe were beneficial, whether it's in admissions or just like a way to pursue your passion for business and just kind of familiarizing yourself with it?
I mean, like going by the statistics, I believe every single panelist here did DECA, so I would say do DECA because of that. And then maybe try a couple other like case competitions. I don't really know, like I know a bunch of things have changed, but literally just like do whatever you can sign up for and like manageably like fit. I feel like this advice is more like targeted towards people who are in like, let's say like grade 9 or 10 and don't really have as much of a grasp on what they really want to do. So yeah, like if you're just like starting out, if you're in grade 9 or 10, like go join DECA, go join like FBLA, go join like all those other competitions. If you're in grade 12 and like just started looking at this, I would say like probably stick to your strengths. Don't like, I would not say like go do something new like in grade 12 and dump a bunch of energy into it, just because chances are like it probably won't work out that well for you. And if you really are into it, make a career change after you graduate, but like also don't study something you hate.
All right, thank you. Aricia, if you, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm taking IB next year. So I was just wondering, are there any, I guess, courses you would recommend, for example, like HL economics, or like, because I'm doing the full humanities, but I'm not sure if that's like the right choice to make if I want to pursue business.
So I did HL Econ, and I think the benefit from that was that I didn't have to do like the econ requirement, because like I placed out of it, not placed out of it, but it's like if you get like a 7 in HL econ, then you just don't have to do the econ requirement. So I guess that's like one less course you have to do. I did standard level math, and even if you get a 7 in standard level math, it still doesn't let you waive the math requirement, so I still had to do that. Those are the only two in particular. I think like it's a lot easier, at least at Penn, to transfer AP credits as opposed to IB, because IB is like a lot more like particular. They'll only really transfer stuff if you have it in like HL, and like even HL Chem, like they'll take it only if you're an engineering student. So it's like, yeah, HL Econ is pretty good.
Okay, so Maya and I went to the same school, so we had the same like courses to choose from. And for us, we had to choose between HL history and HL econ. So on the flip side, I chose to take HL history instead of HL econ. I don't think it affected me too much, besides the fact that like I kind of struggled in intro to intro to microeconomics with algebra, but because I hadn't seen any of the content before. I would honestly say just like do whichever one would be the least painful for you, because there's nothing you can't learn in university. However, if you're in high school and you have to balance all these ECs and all these courses, don't purposefully pick something that's you're not going to enjoy and that's going to ruin the rest of the experience for you, because HL history was a pain. I enjoyed it, but it was a pain, and I know not everyone would.
If you have the option to take HL geography, I highly recommend it because it's a free course.
Yeah, honestly, if you're going to business, like I had to take so many STEM classes, which is like, why did I do that? Well, I did it because there were no other IB courses offered at my school. But I took like chem and bio, and have never needed in my life to ever have science knowledge. So yes, don't worry about what other people think about you, because they'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm not taking hard sciences. No, do what is best for you. Do not take the hard STEM courses if you don't need to. And I sound very traumatized because I am. I don't consider myself a very quantitative person, and that just made my entire life so much harder, because it was so much harder for me to keep up my grades.
Okay, thanks. That's really reassuring, because my mom's like a hard STEM person, so she's kind of been against me taking full humanities. But that's really nice to hear. Thank you.
All right. Oh, I really don't want to mispronounce your name. I'm so sorry. But you have your hand raised, so you can go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. My name's Javier, by the way. And I also had a question, like, that was also IB related. So the thing about this, like, I had 2 questions that were IB related. So like my first one was a bit more personal. So I'm gonna be starting IBDP next year, which is gonna be grade 11. So the thing about my school is that we have like these course packages, because we have so many students at our school. It's not like you can personalize what courses you can take. It's like you can take a group of courses. So for me, I took HL business because I wanted to go into business. But the thing is that it comes with HL bio and SL math. So I was wondering, like, do you think like, especially with the schools, like, do you think applying to a business program in that school, like, have you seen people go this route, or like, what are your thoughts on this? And like my other question would also be like general tips for IB.
Sorry, I think you got like really quiet at the end. You could just like repeat the last part.
Yeah, so my second question was like if you had any general tips for IBDP.
Just like full disclosure, I took I can just list out the IB HLs like I took. I took HL Bio, HL like English because we had to, and like HL History. Okay, but anyways, I took HL Bio and I also took SL Math. And I think those are fine. I would say honestly, this is maybe just because I'm personally biased because I hated my IB experience so much. I don't think you need to take the most rigorous IB courses to demonstrate that you're an academically like talented student. I honestly think you're much better off balancing your courses and doing well than you are just taking the hardest classes and proving that you can take the hardest classes. So I would say do what's best for you. I think out of the HL sciences, HL Bio is the most is kind of I don't want to say the easiest, but if you don't consider yourself a sciencey person like me, it's not the worst. SL Math, I think you can do it as well. And honestly, HL business sounds kind of interesting. So maybe I don't know if that wasn't offered at my school, but if you think you can handle it and you think it's a good way to get your foot in the door in regards to what you think about business, I think that sounds like a pretty good combination.
Hearing those sets of courses, I would say yes, take it, because SL business management was a walk in the park for quite a lot of people until you got to like the accounting section, and then you needed like maybe 1 or 2 days of reading. And then HL Bio, in my opinion, is the easiest out of the 3 like STEM like HLs, because HL Physics is a nightmare. And then HL Chem is like a secondary nightmare. And then HL Bio is by comparison very nice. And then what was the last one? Yeah, SL Math is also like pretty good. HL Math is for people who really, really like math, let's put it that way. So yeah, I would like, if I were you, I would take that.
All right, if that's all, we're gonna wrap up the breakout rooms in about a minute, but we really appreciate all of your responses and all the questions. I think it was really insightful to hear from all of you, and we'll return to the main room in just like a minute. So thank you.
I think it's hard to quantify exactly how much time I spent on my applications, because I think it's just like a whirlwind of writing, reviewing, and etc. But to be quite frank, I think it is definitely a lot to manage. And I don't think, like, I think if anyone was like, oh, the US application process is a breeze, they would be lying, but it's very much doable. And I think some of the best advice I got was to try and create a community of people that are very supportive. So like I went to a high school where no one was applying to US schools except for me. So that was kind of isolating, but it was finding support in my friends, family, guidance counselors, etc. But in terms of managing with the extracurriculars, I really did love the activities that I did. So as much as it got overwhelming, there were things that I enjoyed, but also I was like worked heavily within the nonprofit realm. And one thing that I learned while being a leader is also the importance of reaching out for help and stepping back. So come like November, December, end of October, where things are really like picking up, I took a leave, I think, for December and end of November from my nonprofit work, and like helped allocate the responsibilities to people I worked with, and they were very much understanding. So being willing to ask for help, but also pause and step back, I think is really important. And I don't know if I would have been able to handle everything if I didn't make the decision to step back. And I know it can be hard to be like, okay, I need to take a break, I need to pause, especially when you're very used to like, oh, I want to do everything, I want to do this. But like making that realization that you can't do everything is okay, very much okay.
I would also just say like starting early is definitely very helpful, because for me, like a lot of my friends were like starting their essays in the summer, or being like, oh my gosh, I wrote 5 drafts. And then like sometimes you're like, oh, that's kind of cringe, but then like their essays are really good and they get in. So definitely do that. And also don't feel the need to apply to like every single school just because it's like prestigious, or I don't know, something else, but maybe like choose like 10 maximum like in the US to apply to, just so you can really focus on making your applications strong for each school and not just like end up rushing yourself or like sacrificing quality for quantity. Because most of like the top schools in the States like demand very high quality in order to be accepted.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And to just kind of add another angle to that as well, I think that before you start crafting the application, it's important to do a bit of reflection to think like, what do I exactly want to communicate? What themes do I want to focus on? Because quickly you'll find that it's really hard to encapsulate your entire identity and everything that you love in this application that someone is only going to be reading for 10 to 15 minutes. So rather than trying to put everything, first taking some time to think about what are the main areas that I want to focus on. Like for me, I wrote a bullet point of 3 things that I wanted to be mentioned in my application as a whole and like the themes that I wanted to come across. And so whenever I was trying to write an essay, if it didn't fall into one of these 3 categories, I ended up like not going forward with it. And I think that was helpful in saving me a lot of time because I didn't spend a lot of time writing like a bunch of different essays that I knew I wasn't going to use. And I really honed in on what I knew would be the focus of my application. And I just kept making that type of essay better rather than like editing a bunch of different ones. And I think that helped me save a lot of time. And then again, starting early and focusing on the applications that you care the most about. So like for me, I always wanted to go to Stanford. That was my top choice. So when I was planning out what I wanted to prepare in the summer, I didn't start writing essays for like 10 different universities. I really only focused on Stanford because that was like my main choice. And I think that worked out in the end because that's when I was like most motivated, because I feel like as the process goes on, you may become a bit burnt out. So I think that for me, because it was the first application and I was like most motivated, I was definitely able to do better in this application rather than some of the ones that I prepared at the end.
So we have another question coming in from the chat. It reads, what are you hoping to do after you earn your degree? And what particular aspect of yourself do you think made you stand out as an applicant? I guess we could answer these in 2 parts. So we can start with the first question.
I guess I can talk about this. So basically, for me personally, I'm not specifically sure if I want to go in like a very like specific career path. I'm definitely trying to keep my options open, but I know that I'm interested in either pursuing more of like social entrepreneurship or going to law school. So both of those things are areas that I'm interested in. And I feel like personally for me, social sciences is a really important field in entrepreneurship because it allows you to like understand the audience that you're working with, different aspects of human behavior. And I think that I would be able to do a lot with it in that realm. So I think that a lot of times people think that a social science degree can be quite restricting or you have to go in a certain career path. But I feel like based on what I've seen and based on what I've seen a lot of other people do with their degrees, I think that there are a lot of directions that you can go in. And I'm interested in either law or social entrepreneurship.
I think for me, I have no idea what I want to do.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I wish that's a question I had the answer to. And I've done like my first year and I'm still like, I have no idea. I honestly, at first, like end of grade 11, I thought it was pre-med, not anymore. And then I thought it was pre-law when I got in, not anymore. Now I'm like, oh, banking, but like you kind of figure it out. But the moral story to my answer is that you have a lot of time to figure it out. Like I've done my first year, I'm going into my second year, and I'm still not 100% set on my major. Like you declare at the end of your second year. A lot of people switch their majors many times. A lot of people switch from like engineering, which is a BSc degree at Princeton, to like computer science, which is BA. Well, there's computer science engineering, but there's normal. Anyway, that's the specifics. But people switch all the time, and you don't need to know. I don't know. A lot of people don't. You have time.
All right, so now we can move on to the second half of the question, which was, which particular aspects of yourselves do you think made you guys stand out as an applicant when you applied for your universities?
I can start. I think that the advocacy I did was very niche. So I was very much focused on fighting period poverty and stigma on a national level. which I think in itself is like very specific and not very common. And my Common App essay was very much catered towards that because I knew it was something that was more unique about what I was doing. But also like with that, I very much like dedicated myself to the work I did in the sense of like starting Canada's National Period Day. And with that came like media opportunities I was very like lucky to have, like CTV Canada, CBC, whatever. But I think with that, like those can all be like sound very intimidating. What I learned while doing this nonprofit and like advocacy work is that a lot of these like media opportunities and these like nonprofit opportunities are more accessible than you think. And sometimes for us, like getting these, like when I did the nonprofit work, being featured on like national TV was very much just cold emailing and reaching out. Same thing with research opportunities, same thing like with working with like getting mentors. A lot of it is just reaching out because more people are there to help youth than you realize.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I feel like a lot of times people think that activities like being featured on media or like getting involved with a nonprofit may be like super hard in comparison to things such as clubs. But in my personal experience, I felt like it was a lot more straightforward to do because, for instance, like my organization ended up being featured on Forbes magazine. And whenever I tell people that, they're like, oh my God, that's so impressive. But for me, it only took a few cold emails to send. And it was definitely like a more low time commitment thing, but it had a much higher like return on my application than like doing a traditional club or a traditional activity. So I think that a lot of those things helped me stand out, but also I think I didn't just focus in one area and one area only. Like there was one area that I excelled in my application, but there were also diverse interests that I had. So I'm really interested in political science, specifically Iranian studies research, and Stanford has an Iranian studies department. And I felt like the mix of my interests was very unique in comparison to other people who were applying from Canada, because I think that when you're applying to highly selective institutions, there's always going to be someone who has accomplished more than you, who has higher grades than you, and overall who may have a stronger application, but no one is going to have the same story and the same mix of interests. So I think that crafting that narrative and demonstrating that you're not just one dimensional, but you have multiple areas of interest and things you want to do is really important. And then another thing I want to add is also personal qualities. After I got into Stanford, my admission officer wrote me like a note of like what she liked about my application. And a lot of it was based on like personal qualities and things like that. So I think even if you don't have the best grades or like a perfect GPA, those personal qualities, demonstrations of like leadership and things like that really help you stand out.
I just wanted to add that I think the UK application process is a lot different in that they actually focus a lot more on your academics and your test scores and less so on your extracurricular activities or personal qualities or like ability to like tell a story or like express your identity. So I think like for my application to Oxford, at least, what mostly helped me stand out was a very strong record on like AP exams and on the ACT and also on like the TSA, which is Oxford's own admission exam for my program. And then also just like having a very strong background in the subjects that I wanted to study, which are philosophy, politics, and economics, and being able to communicate that during the interview as well. So for UK schools in particular, like they definitely value academics very strongly, but I agree with like what Armida and Mia said. For American schools, it's definitely more holistic. So your story is very important then.
So I guess moving away from applications and moving into more university life things, do you guys have any favorite courses that you guys are taking or have took? I know, Andy, for you, this doesn't apply as much, but for Mia and Armida, you guys, or actually no, for Armida, this doesn't apply either. But for Mia, do you have a favorite course from your 1 year?
I feel like that's really hard. I've been in such a summer mind because in university, your summers are 4 months long. So I haven't been in school for like, I guess a bit now. But something that I really like about Princeton and a lot of like the private US institutions is the small class sizes. So like I've taken like classes, like my French class, for example, second semester had 3 people, including me. It was me and 2 other people, and then the prof, which was great. I love that class. but I think one of the coolest classes I've taken, my first semester, I took a class about like where we basically watched movies the entire class and analyzed like it was like the role like women played in the movies and like the reverse of narrative. And I think the class was called What Will Happen to Her Next. In the introductory class, we basically watched a movie where we thought that the woman was going to get murdered, but instead ended up like being the murderer. And we talked about like narratives. Anyways, moral of the story is there are a bunch of really cool, unique classes. Prison has a class on Egyptian hieroglyphics, like a bunch of random things. So I think the cool thing about university is just being able to see all these different interesting classes that you wouldn't have taken in high school.
So before we end, I think we could go around and maybe you guys could briefly touch on why you chose your specific universities, and then I guess the area of study that you guys are planning on studying or currently studying, and then what that university has to offer within that area of study.
Oh wait, before that, I think there's like new people that joined. So like if you guys have any questions, feel free to do that as well. Yeah, I think if not, I also actually had a question. Well, two. I talked to Andy about this as well, but the first question being, when applying for like a specific program, let's say in the States or even for the UK, should you prioritize your like actual interest in what you want to study in, or should you prioritize a program that suits your academic or like extracurricular achievements more? And then that would be like the first question.
Okay, a hot take. I think the answer is very different depending if you're applying to the US or the UK. I also applied for the UK, so I know like this application process, but you're more like you're applying for a course and you're more bound to that course. So, and you also, when you're applying, as Andy mentioned, you need to show that you have like actual like academic interests and background in the course that you're applying for. But with the US, you can apply for really anything and switch your major. Like, for example, I applied politics for Princeton with potential majors in gender and sexuality studies and space and evolutionary science. I absolutely not getting a minor in space and evolutionary science, but I did like a lot of like interesting aerospace research in high school. So that was relevant to my application. So I'd say for the US schools where you have a lot of freedom and being able to switch your major, even if you're not sure if you specifically know what you want to major in, I would do something that's cohesive to your application or something like something that's cohesive to your interest in your application. And that's like what I played to my advantage. Like I did a lot of work within like gender and sexuality studies. I'm actually getting that minor as well. But I kind of had an idea that I didn't know if I wanted to do anything STEM related in high school, in college, but I had some STEM background in high school and wanted to play into that. Like, oh, I have a variety, like an interdisciplinary background, interdisciplinary like studies and etc. So I think it's dependent on the school that you're applying for and also how easy it is to switch between different schools. So at Princeton, for example, very easy to switch from engineering to an AB between majors. Some other schools like Georgetown, for example, you're more bound to your school. Same thing like with Penn. If you want to go Wharton at Penn, it's very much specific to apply to that school because it's hard to get into after you're already in. But that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you said. And definitely like for UK schools, it's very hard to switch courses because you apply for a specific course with like allocated spots. So at Oxford, it's like very, very rare to change courses. And when it happens, it's usually like psychology and philosophy to like just psychology or just philosophy. It's very hard to like switch completely. So I would say like apply to something that you can like bear studying for 3 years and like want to go, because if you think of like university as a continuation of high school, like your life after university will also be like a continuation of university. So like, I guess like go down the path you want to go down. And like, if you still have time, I guess like make your experiences and like application more aligned with your interests if possible. And like, it definitely like if you're even younger, like grade 8 or 9 or like 10, don't like do extracurriculars because that you're not interested in, simply because you think it'll like boost your application in some way.
I don't think I have anything to add to that because I think you guys answered that perfectly. So
Yeah, thank you for that. I have one more question before we end it. And I think there's also one more question in the chat. I think my question caters towards like people who did research in high school. So I think like with research and usually do this with like a professor on a certain topic that you're pretty interested in. And my question is there like a really big difference in how you get published and if getting published in a high school journal is something to look into?
So for me personally, I did do research in high school, but I did it only over the summer. So I was not necessarily looking at it for like a long-term thing. I do know some friends who were doing research from like grade 10, grade 11, and they were able to get their papers published. And that was like definitely on a larger scale than I did work. However, they didn't end up like getting into the schools that I got into, but then I ended up getting into. So I think that like it's not always about like having those tangible accomplishments, but also about what it means to you. So for instance, for me, as I was going through high school, I was really interested in economics, but then the summer before senior year, I started to also become really interested in political science. And I was like, maybe I also want to study this in university. So I searched for research opportunities then, and I was able to do some research over the summer on this topic. And even though from that, I didn't get a tangible like paper published, I was able to get a recommendation letter and illustrate that I did have this other interest and confirm that I wanted to pursue this at a higher level in university. So for me, like I didn't publish any papers, but I still was able to demonstrate another side of my interest and also get a recommendation letter out of it, which I think helped my application.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So I did a program called Shad Canada. You guys might know what that is. It's pretty common. And my year it was virtual, but my design group ended up winning. So we went to go on to work with Blue Origin to send a payload to space. It's so confusing to explain. So in that sense, I was doing a lot of like aerospace science, material science research, but from my end of the group, I worked heavily on the how this was going to impact the world, how we're going to reach people. So in my application, I centered like how this like STEM work, how I approached it from a more social science perspective. Because I think what a lot of US institutions are looking for is that students of different interests are able to come and work together. Because like for Princeton, for example, we have the general education requirements. It's where it's like, I have to take a science class. I have to take a quantitative studies class. I have to take a history class. So they want to push students of different interests to take a variety of different classes. So if you're showing that you're open-minded and willing to work with a variety of different disciplines while still being like, hey, like I am approaching science from a social science perspective, showing that you have some sort of focus. I think that's helpful, but really they're looking for just like academic curiosity, the willingness and like excitement to learn. I think that's a big focus in the application. Something someone once told me is that even like mentioning that you enjoy reading is something that they like to see because they really just want students that are excited to learn. So I think in terms of like having published research, it's not that as like important as what you're getting out of your experiences and showing that you're excited and you're passionate, you're curious.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think there's like 2 more questions in the chat that we could quickly go over before we close off the breakout rooms. Marco, do you want to take over from here?
Yeah, so we have one question that came in the chat. It says, when did you start talking to teachers / guidance counselors about applying to university? And I guess this one specifically, like talking to them about applying internationally. So if anyone has any comments about that.
For me, it was like at the end of grade 11, the summer before, like before the summer, before grade 12. And I think that like gave my teachers a lot of enough heads up for like mainly from the standpoint of writing recommendation letters. And I think that helped my application. And I got to read like one of my recommendation letters from my English teacher. And I think it was like really, really strong because she has like this policy where she only writes 3 recommendation letters a year. And so like for like her especially, it was like very important to ask early. So I think it's always just like safer in general to ask early. And for me, like the end of grade 11 was a good time.
Yeah, so I'm basically for me, I asked at the end of like grade 11 as well. So before going into the summer, because I remember that my math teacher who I was asking for a recommendation letter was going on leave in like the fall. And so I wanted to ask her early to make sure that she would write me the letter. But then in the fall, a few months before she left, everyone was coming to her and asking her for recommendations, but she ended up saying like no to everyone else and only wrote it for me because I had asked her earlier. So I think that even if the teacher is not planning to start it in the summer or isn't going to like think about it as much, which was the case for some other people that I asked, it's really important and helpful to ask like before you go into the summer, because at least it can be on their mind and you can make sure that if they're not going to be in the school or if something's going to be going on, they're still going to be able to write you that letter.
Yeah, I agree with what was said. I, as we know, started late, and I asked like what beginning of grade 12, like a month, 2 months into grade 12. So stressful, not great. I went to high school where my guidance counselors, my teachers never had students apply to the US before. Like I was the only one. So they were also confused and I had to like teach them while I also had no idea what I was doing. So like if you're in a similar situation, my best advice is don't do what I did and start early. Just ask at the end of your grade 11. And if your teachers are like, oh, what the heck, this is so early, Canadian students like applying to Canadian schools don't ask me until like November, like explain to them that this is a different application process. And even if they don't want to write it right now, like here are some things to consider. So like if you're asking them and come September, they already have like an idea of what you need. It's much better than cramming it in grade 12, I promise you.
So the final question in chat is, what do you want your legacy to be? Anyone wanted to start us off with that one? Maybe we could also, oh, sorry. Yeah, you can go. Sorry.
Well, basically, I was just going to say that's a very deep question. And I think it's something that I still think about like on a daily basis. I'm not entirely sure, but I definitely want to be able to use my education, specifically at Stanford, to be able to help people and improve and like make their lives better. And I think that's always been one of the reasons that I wanted to go to Stanford, is because I feel like it's a very like elite level in society. And a lot of times like people go to those universities because they just want to continue perpetuating cycles of elitism. So I would want to like contribute to, I guess, making society a little bit better in my own way.
Yeah, that was a great answer. I think for me, after finishing my first year of Princeton, I would have answered that question differently if you asked me a year ago before I came. I very much was involved and still am heavily involved in advocacy work, but I think I had this big idea like, oh, I want to change the world. Oh, I want to do this. Oh, I want to do that. And I very much still want to make an impact. But I think I realized that like you can leave a legacy in small ways too. And like some of those things for me are just like being a kind person and sharing love with the people that I care about. And I don't know, just like small things like that are really important to me and became especially more important to me in the last year, like living alone, moving away. And just, I think being able to share those experiences with other people and be spontaneous and go on adventures, I think that's a legacy I want to leave alongside like what I want to do with my education, which I'm still figuring out. But I like moral of the story is it can be big things, but also small things too.
I think I mostly agree. Like I want to have some sort of impact. And I think for me personally, I do like reading the news a lot, and there are like so many issues in the world, but I would be like really happy if I could just make like a very, very small change in like one issue, like whether that's climate change or like world hunger or something along those lines. But I'm not really sure yet.
All right, I think that concludes all the questions that we have. And so that also concludes this breakout room session. So thank you guys for all your answers. I'm sure people in this breakout room learned a lot, but also for the people watching this recording, I hope you guys also learned a lot too.
All right, welcome back everyone. We hope you got all your questions answered in the breakout rooms and got to learn a lot from our panelists. And that brings us to the end of our 2022 US-UK University panel. So we'd like to thank you all for attending and say a special thank you to our terrific panelists for taking this time to share your experiences and advice. And on behalf of all high school students who are beginning this process, I can say that this means a lot to all of us. So thank you so much. If you still have any questions for our panelists, there will be a follow-up email sent out after this panel, which will contain their contact information, so you will be able to get in touch.